Looking back, it's a pretty amazing ride.
All right, so today we're really going to dig into a life story that most folks would agree is anything but ordinary. We're talking about the one and only Kris Kristofferson, who, as many of you probably heard, passed away recently. And yeah, we'll touch on his career highlights, but what we're really interested in today is uncovering the man behind the music. What made Chris's tick?
It's funny you should put it like that because for me, what's always been so captivating about Kristofferson is how he embodies this incredible paradox. This guy lived multiple lives, each one seemingly completely at odds with the others, and yet somehow it all came together, coalesced into this singular, impactful life.
I like that. He's a paradox. I'm stealing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit for our listeners because, we're talking about someone whose early life seriously reads like what do you call it, a laundry list of accomplishments. We're talking Rhodes Scholar, star athlete, Army Ranger. The guy was a helicopter pilot. Heck, he even spent some time teaching at West Point.
Yeah, it almost sounds made up, right?
Sure.
And I think that's precisely what makes his decision to pursue music so fascinating, so compelling.
Yeah.
Imagine going from the absolute rigid structure of West Point to the freewheeling world of 1960s Nashville. It's mind-blowing.
Talk about a hard left turn. It makes you wonder what was going through his family's minds when he basically said, "See you later," to what most folks would consider a guaranteed path to success. Like, thanks, but no thanks on that whole prestigious career path. I'm going to go chase this crazy dream in Nashville instead.
And let's not forget, he wasn't just dipping his toes in the water, right?
Yeah.
One of the articles I read mentioned that his family basically disowned him for a while because of his decision. You're talking about a level of commitment and belief in himself that's just incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so picture this. Kristofferson. He shows up in Nashville, a place overflowing with aspiring songwriters, all vying for their big break. And just to, keep a roof over his head and put food on the table, he takes a job as a janitor. And get this, at Columbia Records, no less.
Oh, wow.
I know, right? Can you imagine? Emptying ashtrays, mopping floors, and all the while, legends like Bob Dylan are in the next room laying down tracks.
It's almost too perfect. It really is. And I think what's often overlooked is that Kristofferson's success wasn't instant. It's easy to look back and just see the hits, but this is a guy who spent years, literally years, honing his craft, figuring out how to navigate that tricky space between his intellectual background. Remember, we're talking about a Rhodes Scholar here, and the raw, relatable storytelling that defines country music.
That's something I've always found fascinating about him. Here's this guy, brilliant mind, steeped in classic literature, and he chooses to express himself through, of all things, country music. How do you even begin to bridge that gap? I think it speaks volumes about the depth he brought to his songwriting.
I agree with you. It wasn't about him abandoning his intellect. It was about finding a way to distill it, to make it connect with a broader audience through the power of music.
And boy, did he ever. You start rattling off those iconic songs. Me and Bobby McGee, Sunday morning coming down, help me make it through the night. These aren't just country songs. These are songs that are woven into the very fabric of American music.
And you know what gets me? It's that while Kristofferson, he definitely had his own success as a performer, a lot of those songs, they became hits for other artists.
Oh, you're absolutely right. When you think about Me and Bobby McGee, you almost immediately think of Janis Joplin, and Sunday Morning Coming Down was huge for Johnny Cash.
It really goes to show a certain generosity of spirit, wouldn't you say? He understood that his words could take on a whole new meaning, a whole new life, when they were interpreted by a different voice.
It's like he was offering these gifts to the world, trusting other artists to find their own truths within them. But speaking of Johnny Cash, you can't really talk about Kris Kristofferson without mentioning that crazy story of how they met.
Right. The helicopter story.
Right.
Now, whether it happened exactly the way the legend goes, well, that's debatable.
It's probably been embellished a bit over the years.
Exactly. But it makes for one heck of a story.
It really does. You got to admire the audacity, I guess, of this unknown songwriter determined to get his music heard by one of the biggest names in country music. So he decides to, land a helicopter on Johnny Cash's lawn, demo tape in hand.
It's legendary. And you know what? Helicopter or not, what's clear is that Johnny Cash played a major, and I mean major role in launching Kristofferson's career.
Oh, yeah, for sure. He was like a mentor, a champion for Kristofferson, especially in those early days. I think it was one of the articles that mentioned how Cash actually introduced him at the Newport Folk Festival, which, if I'm not mistaken, ended up being a huge turning point for Kristofferson.
Absolutely. For those who may not know, the Newport Folk Festival was, and frankly still is, a huge deal in the music world. And for an artist just starting out, someone like Kristofferson at the time, that kind of exposure, you just can't buy that.
It's like winning the lottery for your career. Talk about a make or break moment. But, this is where Kristofferson's story takes another, unexpected turn. Just as his music career is really gaining some serious traction, he sets off on this whole other path in Hollywood.
It really is like he couldn't be contained. You know what I mean? It's like music, yeah, that's great. But this guy needed multiple outlets for his creativity. I mean, you have to remember, this is the era of, what do they call it? Outlaw country, right?
Yeah.
A time when you've got artists like Kristofferson and Cash and Willie and Waylon, and they were all challenging the rules, not just in their music, but in like their whole way of life.
Yeah. And it wasn't just about like wearing black and singing about being a rebel. I mean, these guys were pushing boundaries left and right. You listen to that music and it blurs the lines between country and folk and rock. And let's not forget, they weren't afraid to get political either, which actually I think that's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen. But anyway.
I totally agree.
So you've got Kristofferson and his move to Hollywood, and it's like, yeah, this totally fits, right? This is a guy who never wanted to be put in a box. One minute he's writing songs in Nashville, the next he's starring in a gritty Sam Peckinpah Western like Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
And don't forget, A Star is Born with Barbra Streisand. Talk about a cinematic experience.
Right. And what I find so interesting is how his look, that kind of ragged, lived-in face, which, let's be honest, was a far cry from your typical polished Hollywood star, it somehow became part of his appeal.
For sure. I mean, he brought a certain authenticity to those roles,
Mm-hmm.
A kind of world weariness, I guess you'd call it, that really resonated with audiences. And you can see how that same rawness, that realness that made him so compelling on screen, it also infused his songwriting.
It's really amazing. It's like those two sides of him, the intellectual and the outlaw, they somehow managed to not only coexist, but to actually complement each other in his acting. What do you think? Do you think that success he found in Hollywood, do you think it changed his approach to music at all?
That's a good question. It's always tough to say for sure, but if you ask me, I think it probably gave him a certain level of freedom, creatively speaking. Even if some of his albums, particularly the later ones, weren't exactly topping the charts, he had the kind of clout at that point that he could just keep making music on his own terms. He'd earned that right.
He definitely earned it. He wasn't afraid to experiment, to follow whatever creative impulse struck him. And speaking of following paths, we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't at least touch on his time with the Highwaymen. I mean, come on, you're talking about four of country music's biggest icons joining forces. It's like the Avengers of country music, right?
The Highwaymen were more than just a supergroup, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
They represented this really unique moment in music history where genres were starting to blend together more fluidly, and artists like these guys were really embracing a more, rebellious, independent spirit.
And Kristofferson, with his history of, bucking the system, he fit right in. But I don't know, even within that group of legends, he always managed to stand out. You know what I mean? It's like he wasn't just a songwriter. He was a true poet at heart. The way he crafted his lyrics, it's like he could capture these incredibly complex emotions and experiences in just a handful of words.
Absolutely. There's a depth and an honesty there that goes beyond genre, really. He wrote about things that we all grapple with, love and loss and faith and doubt and the desire for freedom and the weight of responsibility. And he did it all with this rawness that was, for lack of a better word, incredibly human.
I like that, raw and human. Because I think you're right. It's easy to get caught up in all the outward trappings, the Grammys and the gold records and all that. But at his core, Kristofferson was a storyteller. And he used his music to connect with people on this really deep human level.
And that connection, it wasn't just limited to his music either, right? I mean, this is a guy who was also a pretty vocal political activist. He never shied away from speaking truth to power.
Yeah, you're right. Whether he was protesting the Vietnam War or advocating for Native American rights, Kristofferson was always willing to use his platform to shine a light on issues he believed in, even when it meant taking a stand that wasn't popular.
And I think that's another important part of his legacy, right?
Yeah.
He understood that art and activism could, maybe even should, go hand in hand. That music, especially, could be an incredibly powerful force for social change.
For sure. I mean, he was a true artist in every sense of the word, always pushing the boundaries, always challenging conventions, and always using his voice. Whether it was through song or through his activism, he never stopped trying to speak truth to power. Even when he started facing health problems later in life, he never stopped creating, He never lost that connection with his audience.
It's true. And there's this really beautiful almost heartbreaking poignancy to those later performances. Even as he was struggling with memory loss, the music remained this lifeline for him, a way to tap into something deeper, something that transcended the struggles he was going through. Almost like the music itself became a form of memory, wouldn't you say?
It's true, yeah. It's like the music itself became a way for him to hold on to the stories, hold on to those raw emotions, even as other things, I don't know, maybe even memories themselves started to slip away.
And I think that speaks to the power of music, right? I mean, it has this incredible ability to kind of transcend time and place. It offers us solace and connection even when we're faced with really difficult circumstances.
It's powerful stuff. We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about his time as a Rhodes Scholar, his whole outlaw country phase, his surprise success in Hollywood. But when you look back at it all, what do you think is the most enduring aspect of Kristofferson's legacy? What's the thing that'll stick with people for generations to come?
For me, it really boils down to authenticity. No matter what he was doing, whether it was writing songs or acting or speaking out about what he believed in, he did it his way. He never compromised who he was, never backed down from his vision or his values.
And maybe that's what resonates with people even today. He was unapologetically himself, flaws and all. And there's something really powerful, really inspiring about that kind of honesty, that willingness to embrace all the messy complexities of life.
It's a good reminder that none of us have to fit neatly into any one box. You know what I mean? It could be these multifaceted, sometimes even contradictory people and still live really meaningful, impactful lives.
Yeah, totally. And as we wrap up our deep dive on Kris Kristofferson, the songs, the stories, the impact he had on music and beyond, it makes me think, if you could just sit down with the guy, share a beer and a laugh, maybe pick his brain a little bit, what would you ask him? I mean, knowing all that we know now about his incredible journey, what would you want to know about the man behind the music, the man behind the legend?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. I think I just asked him to tell me a story.
Yeah.
Because with Kristofferson, even the simplest anecdote had a way of becoming something really profound. Just a little glimpse into a life well lived.
That's a perfect way to put it. So to everyone listening, we'll leave you with that image. Kris Kristofferson leaning back, maybe with a twinkle in his eye, ready to share a story or a song, or maybe just a little piece of hard-earned wisdom from a life lived on his own terms. And we hope that his journey, his willingness to defy expectations inspires you to find your voice, to never stop asking questions, and to embrace the messy, beautiful journey of being true to yourself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.